that we can fight, that we will stand and fight, and we can have proven we can win. Shortly afterward, George Washington arrived and he took over, and George Washington was to lead the colonial army from that day till the day that the surrender occurred. George Washington, right here. He became the general of the colonial army, and he had a tough time with it. To make a long story short, the British replaced their general with another general. They replaced General Gage with General Howe, and then they replaced General Howe with General Clinton. No relation to Bill Clinton. But George Washington was destined to suffer defeat after defeat after defeat at the hands of the British. And a lot of them were his own fault. He was no match for the British generals. He was a farmer by trade and not a general. Nevertheless, he eventually learned better with his defeats how to, and I will say this, his record is he won 4 battles and lost 13. But, and this is something Napoleon can't say, George Washington won his last battle. Napoleon couldn't say that. And sometimes it's that final battle that counts. But George Washington won his last. All right. Okay. This was the beginning of the Revolutionary War. Oh yeah, there was also a Sugar Act that occurred in there. There was the Townsend Act, there was a Boston Massacre, there was a Coercive Act. Regrettably, I don't have time to go over them all, but I've covered this, skimmed it. We'll go on to chapter 7 about the war. We've still got about 90 minutes or so left. All right. The test starts at 3:15. That gives us 30 minutes.
So we get 15 minutes.
We have 30 minutes for the test. Yeah. So the test starts at 3:15. So we have about more than an hour before the test starts. Okay, chapter 7. While the war was going on, the Second Continental Congress met. And the Second Continental Congress was destined to guide us through the war. During the war, we had no president. Actually, we had several presidents who led us at times during the from the Continental Congress. I have heard, but I can't actually name him, and I've heard that one of the presidents who presided over the Second Continental Congress is a black man. I have heard it. But be that as it may, one of the men was John Hancock, who signed the Declaration of Independence. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, John Hancock had heard that King George had bad eyes. So he said the king won't need his glasses to read my writing, and he signed in big bold print. Right? He was the first one to sign. Anyway, the Second Continental Congress wrote the Declaration of Independence. The man who wrote the Declaration of Independence was Thomas Jefferson. Now, I've got to say, Thomas Jefferson continues to make news from time to time. And anyway, he was a slave owner. And I'm not going to cover that up. You say that your teacher never mentioned that. That's a good point. They all were, including George Washington. Ben Franklin was not. He was a Yankee, but they all were slave owners at the time. Thomas Jefferson was too, and there are moves on to. Well, anyway, that's jumping around the story a little bit, Sean, right there. So just to let you know I'm aware of it. Anyway, he wrote the Declaration of Independence. Part of the reason, John Adams was presiding over the Congress at the time, who became second president. And John Adams wanted to get everybody involved, so they asked John Adams, you write it. John Adams said, I'm not that great at writing, and turned to a Virginian named Thomas Jefferson, you write it. So Thomas Jefferson went to another room and he wrote it. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, every paragraph, he has, he has, he has, he has, he has. It was all against King George III. He has sent our people to England to be tried without counsel, without arms.
When the Declaration says he has, it's talking about King George.
Yeah, we know that. I mean, it was understood. It was the King of England. And at one point it says, a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. He has imposed governors on us without our consent. He has quartered his troops in our private homes in peacetime without the consent of the owner. He has forced us to pay his taxes in gold and silver currency, which would greatly, I mean, all of this, he has this, that, and the other. Grievances that we had against the King of England. Now, anyway, the Declaration was ratified almost as Jefferson wrote it, and then the copies of it, 13 copies were sent to each of the colonies. There are 2 or 3 original copies still left. The rest of them either got rained on along the way, burned in fires, or lost somewhere along the way. But there are 2 or 3 copies left that are preserved in a glass cage to where everything is pumped out with a certain kind of inert gas, nitrogen, I believe, to where they won't decay. It might be hydrogen or helium, but some kind of inert gas that, well, hydrogen is not inert, definitely not. But anyway, but a copy was sent to the King of England, Declaration of Independence. And the King of England sent his armies over here to fight with us. Now, I'm going to fight the war in about 2 or 3 minutes, even though it actually took a lot longer than that to fight. The war lasted from 1775 to 1781, 6 years, and then after the war was over, the peace treaty took 2 years to sign. So the peace treaty was not ratified until 1783, 8 years after the war began. The war was a risky business because there was no chance the colonials had to whip England, except for a few things. The ball took a few favorable bounces. Number one, in the middle of our war, Spain declared war on England. The Spanish would not help us because the Spanish feared that we were getting so many people that we were eventually going to take over Spanish territory, which we did, by the way. But there's an old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. When Spain started fighting against England, that helped us. But in the meantime, while the war was going badly for the colonial army, there was a big victory that occurred at Saratoga. When the British were whipped and forced to surrender. Big victory for the colonials, and when that battle occurred, Benjamin Franklin was able to persuade the King of France to fight for us. So the King of France agreed in 1777 to fight on our side, but it took 1781, took 4 years to arrive. And again, if you remember one line in the movie, The Patriot, the long-awaited help from the French finally arrived. Yeah, finally did. It took 4 years. But the long-awaited help from the French. Now, I believe this book has reasons why the British lost, and hopefully all of you know the British lost. One reason was the British were only fighting in the summertime, or beginning in the spring and quit fighting in fall. The colonials surprised the British twice. Once at Trenton, surprised the British in December, the dead of winter, while the British were celebrating. And then George Rogers Clark went to the Northwest Territory and surprised the British in the dead of winter also. The British were celebrating big time. As a result of what George Rogers Clark did, taking that territory from the British, we got the states of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota given to us when the war was over. As a result of Daniel Boone, we got Kentucky also, and Tennessee. as Daniel Boone defeated the British Army in Kentucky, the British and Indian Army in Kentucky, Tennessee. The other thing was the British would not use the colonials. Only 1/3 of the colonials rebelled, another third of the colonials remained loyal. If the British would have just made an army out of the loyalists, they were called, the loyalists colonists have won themselves. But the British did not trust the loyalists. But the big reason, though, that the colonials won was the French. The French came to our aid right at the critical time.
So we're talking about Saratoga.
What's that?
We're talking about Saratoga.
The Saratoga, that was the battle, yeah. Okay, Saratoga was one battle, but it's an important battle because as a result of our victory there, the King of France didn't know if he wanted to help the colonials or not. But when we won the Battle of Saratoga without his help, he said, well, these people really know how to fight, so he became convinced. He didn't hear about all the defeats that were suffering, all the defeats. George Washington was not at Saratoga, but the King of France still overlooked those, and he agreed, okay, I'm going to send you help. But then his navy went to the West Indies first, and took a long way around here, and finally they arrived. Then they arrived just in time. Now, another reason the British lost was the British were not used to the big distances. If you look at the map, England small, the colonials large. And the British just couldn't fathom the distances involved in fighting in a country this large. If the British stayed in one place, then the colonials would operate, or the British were not. If the British scattered out, the colonials would be in piecemeal, which is what finally happened. General Cornwallis was caught by himself and defeated piecemeal. Anyway, the last battle of the war occurred at Yorktown. And again, folk, if I were teaching this normally, I'd spend a whole hour talking about the Revolutionary War. We don't have that kind of time. The general who surrendered was Cornwallis. Cornwallis resented being General Clinton's, we might say, sidekick, because Cornwallis was an older man than the young Clinton, and also General Clinton was in some ways known to be childish. Even though, with all respect, General Clinton did not lose a battle during the Revolutionary War. He is blamed in part for losing the war, but he sent Cornwallis south. And when Cornwallis went south, at first he was winning, but then the colonials really regrouped, and Cornwallis found himself forced to go to Yorktown. Now, when Cornwallis went to Yorktown, Yorktown is a peninsula, like, and Cornwallis thought, well, I'll go here, and the British ships will be waiting for me out here. Well, when Cornwallis got to Yorktown, the British ships were there, but there was a problem. The French ships were here. The French ships were between the British and him, and the British ships could not come in and help him. The French outnumbered. So Cornwallis, then General Greene sent a message to George Washington and said, hey, I've got him at Yorktown. If you can get your men here, we can whip him. So George Washington left New York. He sneaked off from New York. He made General Clinton think he was going one place, but then there were a bunch of other French ships waiting for him there near New York, and they carried George Washington. And of course, you know, ships can travel day and night at 20 miles an hour, 20 knots. Yeah, 20. And there was no way Cornwallis could catch him.
Okay, so Cornwallis, he went to Yorktown.
Yeah, he was in York, and he was surrounded. See, because when George Washington came in, the colonials had, and French had 16,000 men, Cornwallis 7,000. Cornwallis was able to get a letter to General Clinton saying, my position is dire. If you can't get here, General Clinton had no ships. There was not much he could do. So basically, General Cornwallis raised a white flag, and a delegation from the colonials and French went in and talked the terms of surrender. And part of the terms of surrender was that the British was to leave and leave their weapon behind. So the British drummers were drumming along, and the British soldiers were marching. Some of them had their face because they were crying. I mean, it's a tough loss to lose a war. Some of them were crying, but at a certain beat on the drum, all the French soldiers threw their rifles down, all the British soldiers threw their rifles down at the same time. Then the British marched onto the ships out here that were waiting for. The ships were allowed to come in and take them, and the British soldiers all sailed home. And when they arrived in England, they realized that General Clinton with his army was not big enough to handle Washington and the French Navy. The King of England tried to get more money, but here was something else was happening. Not only were they fighting the French, they were fighting the colonials, they were fighting the Spanish, but Holland, this is before Holland and Belgium split, Holland was threatening war on England, and so was Russia. And the British people said, we can't handle this. And the British were going deeper in debt. And they said, this war is too expensive. We can't afford it. King George tried to bribe. In those days, bribing was legal. He tried to bribe them. Members of Parliament said, finally, Your Majesty, no, we can't continue this war. We've got to make peace with the French and the colonials at least, so we can resume fighting with the Spanish. Otherwise, we're going to have to be fighting the Dutch and the Russians. We can't fight them all. The king was upset, but there was nothing to do. They met in Paris. The Treaty of Paris ended the American Revolutionary War. Now, there's two treaties of Paris. One ended the French and Indian War. One ended the Revolutionary War. But the Treaty of Paris, in the Treaty of Paris, the United States received all the territories south of Canada, all the way to the Mississippi River.
So there were two treaties of Paris.
Yeah.
One ended the
French and Indian War.
the French
And the other one ended the Revolutionary War. Yeah, good.
the Revolutionary War.
Revolutionary War ended by the Treaty of Paris. And in the Treaty of Paris, thanks to men like George Rogers Clark and Daniel Boone and the French help, the colonials received all the territory. They did not receive, Canada would not take part.
So the one that's written on the board, is that the one that ended the French-Indian War?
It's the same, well, the same name, spelled the same way. But the one is 1763, all right. There's one in 1763 and the other one in 1783. 20 years apart. Two treaties with the same name. Okay, and folk, I'm getting a little bit carried away. Be back around 28 minutes after 2. We'll continue. Yeah, a little bit before 2:30 if you care to.